Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today I'm going to be sharing one of my pet projects I've been working on. This is a Rakdos the Defiler led Storm list. He is not actually proactive for what the deck is trying to do. This is just a black-red Storm deck. This is one of 3 Storm decks that I have been brewing up and made in real life. This one started in like May of 2016, and I've been fiddling with the list since then. I have a Jori En red-blue Storm deck that's pretty typical, and another one that's a secret one that I will most likely show shortly after I'm done testing and fiddling with the major list. Rakdos here, he is the general mainly because for what a Storm deck wants to do, there's no appropriate generals. My goal for doing this, it come from a few places. I just did not want... Blue is so common in Storm, especially blue-black or blue-red interactions, that I was bored with it and I wanted a challenge. So this is my challenge, and he, as a win condition, if the deck falls apart, is pretty good because he can pretty much castrate an opponent if he is allowed to connect. This is not a typical Rakdos deck where you would have lots of hand control and double strike effects to make him really hurt. He's just here as a backup player. But let me get him out of the way, and I will show you the basic parts of this deck broken down to what the cards actually do, like the card function. As a Storm deck, this is a bit awkward to show because I can't do it by like card type like most of my lists. So I'll show card function first, and then at the end of the video, the deck list, I'll actually describe the ideal plays, the ideal attempt to create essentially a good game. So for starters, win conditions. This little stack here is the cards the deck uses to try to win the game with. Thermal Alchemist is very underwhelming. He's a little weak, but this is an ad nauseam deck, which is one of the 3 big high draw enablers. So we are susceptible to early aggro, and having a 2-drop with a nice butt is good, and he can hit all opponents. This deck is designed for 1v1, but something like this does make it more playable in multiplayer. Similarly, Gutter Snipe, again, it hits all opponents. He is, again, a nice way of whittling people down to a lower amount of hit points, so a Storm spell doesn't have to do as much work, because we have the typical ones. Grape Shot, Ignite Memories, which is very whimsical, but it's just a card I enjoy. And Tendrils is the classic one, and Sphinx Bone Wand. While this deck has been created, of course aetherflux Reservoir has been spoiled and released, and it could be in this deck. It would most likely replace Ignite Memories. To be honest, some of these win cons are suboptimal, but again, I'm specifically excluding blue as an experiment. My experiment panned out very well, and I used to play Sphinx Bone Wand a lot. I know this is one of the worst Storm cards you can play. It's more of a casual Storm card, but the way I've designed this deck, this is very powerful. So just heads up, if you like this idea, go find aetherflux Reservoir. It's just good, but it's not in this deck. I just don't really... It seems kind of cheeky, just too easy. The next stack of cards is essentially ways of drawing cards or getting specific cards. These are starting with a stack of card selection cards. There's a reason these are in here. These may not be always best when you could just find better draw cards, but there's a specific card in here that we want cards in our graveyard for. So we have Faithless Looting, Tormenting Voice, Cathartic Reunion, which is a strict upgrade, very nice, draws 3 instead of just 2, but we have to discard 2. Wild Guess and Night's Whisper. We're on to just strict draws. We have 2 drops, 2 drops, for drawing 2. And we have some big high impact draws. As I said, it's an ad nauseam deck. You don't have to have ad nauseam to win with this. That's just the easiest route. So chaining together some high draw 7s, for example, from Wheel or Magus or a more expensive Wheel. This one also has a very cute interaction, but I'll explain that later. Another draw 7. And then we have the 3 most important cards in the deck are the high impact draws. So ad nauseam is your typical Storm card. At the end of someone's turn, just try to cast this and resolve it, and try not to kill yourself. The deck has a current average mana cost of 2.21 precisely. So we have a very high chance. There's only one 7-drop in the entire deck, which is the Sphinx Bone Wand. There's no 6 drops, and I think there's 3 5-drops, if I recall, including Ad Nauseam. So there's not a lot of damage that we can take, and this usually draws us approximately 23-ish to 25-ish cards around that vicinity. The other 2 alternatives next to Ad Nauseam are Necrologia and Necropotence. Both of these require an infinite hand size, and they can actually draw us much deeper than Ad Nauseam. The problem is we are susceptible for an entire turn. We have to sustain ourselves for a turn, hope we don't die to some combat trick. This is weaker, of course, in multiplayer. But these 2 are the second and third high impact draw spells that can win us the game. These usually will draw us 30 to 35. Then we have some tutors. Gamble is here. We usually want to, again, at the end of the video, I'll show the ideal scenario that this deck attempts. And Gamble almost never backfires in that scenario, but it can be anything really, we just lose something. Then we have the more generic tutors. Vampiric, Demonic, Cruel Tutor. There are 3 cards that I cannot currently afford for this deck. While this deck is technically complete, there are 2 placeholders also. But 3 cards. One is Grim Tutor, Imperial Seal, and Lion's Eye Diamond. If I can get a Lion's Eye Diamond for this deck, I would maybe even put in the Hellbent Tutor. Oh shit, I can't remember the name of it now. Whatever. But something like that. Those 3 cards are just very expensive. And financially, if I could afford them, they would be in here. If you play on Magic or MTGO, which I do, and I have Storm List on there too. I'm not going to get in that tangent, but they're much cheaper on MTGO. Insidious Dreams is, if you've seen my Wargirl Dragon combo deck, there's a cute trick you can do with this and Reforge the Soul, so I'll describe that again at the end of the video. And Dark Petition is just an all-star here, because if we can cast Ad Nauseam, we have the mana already for Dark Petition, which we could use. The 3 black also is really good as a comeback too. I mean, I can drop a Necropotence right after. Very good combo piece also, because there is a Increasing Vengeance in the deck. So if we flash back Increasing Vengeance on this, we can generate extra mana, just get 6 black, which is good. The next stack of cards is Recursion. One thing I don't have access to is green or blue to pull stuff back from the graveyard specifically. So we have a few ways of getting spells flashback. This could be another Wheel of Fortune, for example. Then we have Shreds of Sanity. This is a pet card. A lot of competitive players I've been talking to, or Storm experienced players, don't like this card. I fucking love this card. It gets an instant and a sorcery, but you have to discard a card and it exiles itself, so you can't recur it. But there's a trick in this deck, again I'll explain it, where you want to discard a lot of cards. Specifically, you want to discard a Storm card. Because it's coming up here. Past in Flames is your generic win ward. It's one of in most Legacy Storm decks for a reason. It's just expensive, it enables most combos, it's just really good. Here's the special one. Mizzix's Mastery, 4 mana, cast a spell from a graveyard. That's nice. It should be with win conditions though, because of this overload effect. When overloaded, it casts, keyword cast, every card, instant sorcery, from your graveyard. And you can choose the stack, like the order of them on the stack. So for example, if you put a Storm card in your graveyard, and you overload this spell right here, you can have that Storm card go last, so it will steal all the other spells before it, to then count its Storm count. This card is stupid in Storm. So all these extra tricks, like those Cathartic Reunions, the Tormenting Voices, those are used to actually just dump one of the possible win condition cards in the graveyard. Then I don't even have to draw a large amount of cards. I just have to find this. It's like, it's hard to explain how many games this has won, but it just dumb card is dumb. And the classic one is Yogg's Will or Yawgmoth's Win. Again, this can a cute gimmick if you like those cards, the increasing cards like the Tutor or the Vengeance, the Reverberate. This actually lowers their cost since you're casting them from your graveyard. So this can make casting the double copy spell just red from your graveyard. But classic Storm card, rebuy everything, get a Lotus back, whatever you need. The next stack is kind of just a generic filler stack. good stuff, some ways to stay alive and sustain. Again, this is designed for 1v1, so duress, while not very exciting, duress and Thoughtseize are oftentimes important. Pre-storm or pre-ritual, like there's a specific card we have to have resolve in our ideal game plan. We have to check to make sure that card can resolve. You can also see if your opponent may be trolling you with like a mind break trap or something silly like that, or a time stop just to screw with you. A single board wipe. Again, Rakdos himself can and has had to come out multiple times, and he's a great win condition. So if you get him out with the amount of rituals in this deck, he can come out on turn 3 very easily. And if you just wipe their creatures and hit once with Rakdos, that's usually game. People will just scoot to that. We have a Singleton Lightning Bolt for defending ourselves early and just building Storm. Same thing, defending ourselves early, building Storm, cheap 1-drops. A great cheap cantrip that can also force one of our important cards to resolve, be it Ad Nauseam if we need to, or a very specific ritual, which we're about to get to. Greasing Vengeance, it's the only fork effect left in the deck, because buying it back from the graveyard is good. You can chain this with some of those rituals. There's one specific ritual I keep talking about, but chaining that with this and buying it back means you can just get a shit ton of mana, and that just usually wins you the game. Another, just a free spell that ups storm count. The Necropotence and Necrologia require an infinite hand size. So while this may seem bad in most storm decks, in this deck specifically, because we are using Necropotence and Necrologia as one of the two of the 3 critical high draw cards, we have to have this. There's also a Thought Vessel coming up too, and there's a Reliquary Tower. So we have 3 infinite hand sizes in the deck. So yeah, most people see this as casual storm crap. In this deck, it's actually really important. This is used actually to get an Urborg or a Reliquary Tower. More frequently, it is the Urborg, or it is the Reliquary Tower, because I may have a tutor effect for Necrologia or Necropotence. There used to be coffers in here that came out a long time ago. It was too slow. Past that, I'm actually likely to get one of the 3 Badland variants, because there's a Bubbling Muck in this deck, and having the largest number of swamps is best. That's why Urborg is ideal as well. Sensei's Top and Scroll Rack are just for some card selection. Scroll Rack is good because we have a very big pool off of the Ad Nauseam, Necrologia, Necropotence. We can get rid of the excess cards like junk lands we can't cast on our storm turn. Next, the tricky thing with a storm deck is with a curve of 2.2. This entire stack is just mana. Like, these aren't the lands, these are the mana rocks and reductions and rituals. These are the lands, and these are the mana rocks and reductions. 32 lands. So literally more than half this deck has to do with mana and cheap mana. So as I said, this is a Bubbling Muck deck. This is far and superior to a High Tide deck. Like, just significantly so. There's no ways to keep buying it back and giving it flashback and repurling it, but a single Bubbling Muck is usually equivalent to like a Dark Ritual, at worst. Reign of Filth can also sometimes be considered just a Dark Ritual that may sometimes add more. The approximate turn that this deck goes off is somewhere between turn 3 to turn 5 on average. If I get nut draws, of course it's turn 3. Sometimes slow draws, it's turn like 6+. But approximately I will have 4-ish, give or take some lands to give. Then we have the rituals, just Dark Ritual and Cabal Ritual. I like this new artwork. Rite of Flame, when the red rituals, the only 1-drop. Then we have 2 of essentially the same spell. And then Seething Song is just a bigger ritual. And Inner Fire. This is the critical ritual. This is the spell that we absolutely have to resolve when we're trying to do what the deck wants to do. That's why we sometimes want to see this so we can force it through. The goal of the deck with Ad Nauseam or Necropotence or Necrologia is to draw about 20 plus cards, sometimes more, and this gives us just straight up 20-ish mana. Like, we may have to drop a few free rocks or a ritual to get this out, but giving us just randomly 20 red plus mana to work with is usually all it takes for this deck to win. Again, this is not required. We can chain wheels together, we can play the fiddle, the actual storm game of chaining wheels and rituals and building storm like a you're supposed to. But this is the cheeky, easy, quick way to do it. A lot of people have also suggested I run Mana Geyser. Again, this is 1v1. Mana Geyser is not very good in multiplayer, or in 1v1. If this was multiplayer, like my other Storm deck I will shortly show you, then that would be better. But in 1v1, if the spell resolves after we get a good grip, it's usually all it takes. And again, we can copy this and give it flashback and just continually build. The deck actually tends to run drier on black mana than red mana. And I've actually approached that concept and issue in my other deck that I'm currently retuning. This deck hasn't been enough to actually hurt. I don't think I've lost many games significantly because of lack of black mana. I've thought of adding filters and whatnot, but it hasn't actually happened yet, and I don't think I need it. Then we have the actual rocks, just things that also help increase storm. We have 3 mocks that we can play. And then we have a pedal, which is great. You can buy it back, of course, with Yogg-Will if you need to. Then we have some more free mana, the Crypt. This may never actually have mana invested into it. It could just be a 0 mana costing +1 to your storm count. Good enough. Then we have the obvious Soul Ring and the Bauble. Again, this doesn't actually seem good enough half the time, but Bubbling Muck, getting an extra swamp into play, pretty good. There is a complete fetch land complement in here, and I'd have the 3 Badland variants. So this is on and off. It's probably not good enough to be in here, but I like the idea of having a higher volume of swamps for the Bubbling Muck. Mana Vault for the mana, and then we have the 2-drop rocks. The only one that's really important here is Thought Vessel. Again, infinite hand size is required for Necrologia or Necropotence to retain that hand for the whole turn. Then we have a very hideous gold border Grim Monolith. Again, I have 2 placeholders in this deck. This is a placeholder for a legitimate Grim Monolith, and you'll get to the second one shortly here. The only one, I guess I have 5 drops. Anyways, Gildos is important enough. This is usually where I get the black mana necessary to get some spells out on the major turn if I don't have enough of my lands. Then we have 3 reduction effects. Helm of Awakening, Ruby Medallion, and Jet Medallion. These all help me lower my storm, my required cost for a lot of my cards by 1, and they add themselves to the storm count, so they essentially become free on the turn. The Ruby Medallion there is usually the more important. The helm is by far the most important, but Ruby would be next to in colors. Let's go on to the lands. There we go. And again, there are 32 lands. This is the last placeholder. I'm missing a Wooded Foothills of all things. So this is supposed to be a Wooded Foothills, but we have all the fetches we can. Just the 7 on-color fetch lands that get us the 3 Badland variants. And again, this is important because I normally don't run off-color fetches, but in this specific deck, I need the consistency, and I wanted a competitive deck. So I wanted the consistency as high as possible. Here's a fake Badlands. Because having less lands in your giant ad nauseam grip is good, because you're drawing more gas that's actually playable. And thinning out is important, but also having the swamps in play. Literally a swamp mountain is nice because it gives me the red to work with, but a Bubbling Muck deck, I need the swamps. So I have the 3 quote-unquote Badland variants. We have Badlands, Smoldering Marsh, and Blood Crypt. These are the 3 lands. I will try to fetch all 3 to play as fast as possible, unless I see a Reliquary Tower that I need. But then the next land, the 4th land, is Urborg because it makes everything a swamp. Then we have the generic colorful ones, the ones that come into play untapped. We have Command Tower, a Reflecting Poo, Dragon Skull Summit, and Graven Cairns. Then there's only 2 other lands that don't produce color. It's Reliquary Tower and Ancient Tomb. Again, Reliquary Tower's importance. I've already said it multiple times, but infinite hand size is a necessary requirement for 2 particular paths. Then we have, I believe, 8 swamps and 7 mountains. They are the fancy invasion block ones. So let me explain again just a quick run through of the attempt. Like the major attempt here. Let's come back here to you. So our first step in this, assuming we're just doing the generic approach, our first step is to try to find one of these 3 cards. Now if I have these 2, I have to have the infinite hand size, otherwise I can't use them effectively. I can still use them, it's just they're not going to be as good. With infinite hand size, I can draw about 30 cards, assuming I haven't had my ass beat. before turn 3-ish. The amount of rituals in this deck, this all happens very quickly. Without the infinite hand size, I can still play with Ad Nauseam. This is the one you do at the end of an opponent's turn. It's going to draw less cards. Usually about 20 to 25 is a rough average. But with that giant grip of cards, the best thing we can try to do is then resolve an Inner Fire. Inner Fire grants us an absurd amount of red mana. We may need to ritual that out. It may require 1 or 2 cards to be cast before that, so our hand is smaller in size. We may need to gamble or tutor for it. I mean, if we've drawn 20 plus cards, there's a good chance we have a tutor or a gamble or some way to get this. With that mana, we can just shit out our entire hand. And if that, whatever route is easiest to take, if it just means getting the Sphinx Bone Wand out as easiest is good, if we have to chain together a whole bunch of Faithless Looting effects so we can eventually just find the Mizzix Mastery so we can overload and win that way, there's a lot of routes that the deck can take. But the initial setup there is trying to get Inner Fire. That is kind of like the required, the ideal approach. But of course it doesn't have to be there. This is just the quickest way the deck can win. I've actually killed 4 opponents in a 5-player game. On the end of their turn 3, Ad Nauseam, on my turn 4, killed everybody. The storm count was ridiculous. It was the Tendrils plus Sphinx Bone Wand plus Gutter Snipe win. Gutter Snipe was the requirement there because there was too many opponents for me to just target with everything. But that happened on turn 4. 4 opponents down. That doesn't mean the deck is always going to win though. Real quick, again, another reminder. A cute trick if you're playing Ad Nauseam is getting the tutor Insidious Dreams. Because you can then use Insidious Dreams just to whimsically tutor for the most expensive cards in your deck. For example, what I like to do is I like discarding my hand in Insidious Dreams this is an instant, by the way. So at the end of someone's turn, Insidious Dreams tutor this to the top of your deck, at the top of the stack, and then just get the other expensive shit and put it on top. You usually want something like Ad Nauseam, then get the 7-drop and the 5-drop. So this gives you more room with Ad Nauseam, so you're not losing as much life. You can draw much deeper. But yeah, there's a change log and a progress path if you are interested in actually seeing how I designed and developed this deck. Again, it started around May. I made a log on MTG Salvation around June 2016 with the initial idea, and then I made a change log just annotating every single change and step this deck took. The second post shows a synopsis of multiple games as the deck developed itself deeper. This is the current status of the deck. I'm probably going to tuck this away for a little bit. Again, I don't want to put Aetherflux Reservoir in here because that is already one of the win cons in my other 2 Storm decks. And it's also kind of, I don't want to say it's lame, it's a good card. It just doesn't seem it doesn't seem like it takes an elaborate amount of work. I don't know if that makes sense. Storm decks are like solving puzzles, and I love that feeling. But the Aetherflux Reservoir, while very powerful, it doesn't give me that feeling. I think that's the safest way to say that. But yeah, this is I would say this is my secondary Storm deck. My Jori En deck came first. I spliced essentially my friend's Izzet deck, Melik, and my Chandra deck, and then this one came because I desired that deck, but I couldn't afford it. And then I made this deck and that deck at the same time, and then, yeah.